Hello, and welcome to the Health GoLive webinar series. Today's episode is brought to you by your friends at Vanta. We would like to remind you that the Q&A feature is available, so feel free to send in your questions and comments throughout today's webinar. We would love to hear from you. And with that, I will turn it over to our moderator, Faisal Khan.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you all for joining us today. My name is Faisal Khan, and I'm a GRC Solution Specialist at Vanta. Vanta, we're a trust management platform focused on automating and streamlining GRC-related activities for organizations of various segments and industries, healthcare included. I'm super excited to host today's conversation on AI and cyber resilience and just how to approach and balance both in the healthcare industry. I'm joined by an all-star lineup of leaders in the space that we'll hear intros from in just a second. But before we do, just a quick note and reminder that as we go along, if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the Q&A box, and we'll do our best to get to them during the session or towards the end as time permits. With that, let's kick off some introductions with our panel. Anahi, I'd love to start with you, and then we'll go to John and Jason after.
Hi, good afternoon or morning for some. Ana E. Santiago, I am the Chief Information Security Officer for Christiana Care. Christiana Care is the largest health system in Delaware with facilities in the neighboring states, and I'm looking forward to a great discussion.
Thank you. John, we'll go to you next.
Yes, sure. Hello, everyone. My name is John Zamanek. I'm the founder and managing director of Align Technology Group. We're an all-in AWS partner with a healthcare competency, supporting healthcare organizations as they're trying to adopt the cloud in a secure and safe way. And also look forward to the conversation today.
And last but not least, Jason, please.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jason Tall. Next year will mark my 40th year in cyber, the last 30 of which have been in healthcare. I've been under contract to the Department of Health and built many of the systems that are in the CMS and Medicare and Medicaid portfolio. For a time, I was the CISO at General Dynamics and Computer Sciences Corporations, overseeing their public healthcare sectors. So basically supporting every federal agency that's in healthcare, CDC, NIH, the VA, TRICARE, you name it. And then for the last 5 years, I've been a CISO on the provider side, which is a very interesting contrast, especially when we think about healthcare as one industry, when it's definitely not one industry. And I've had a lot of interesting lessons I've learned about applying cyber as a CISO for one of the healthcare systems in the Mid-Atlantic region.
It's awesome. Thank you. And thank you all for the introductions. There's a ton of experience on the call, so very happy to be talking with you all today. To kick us off, we're going to start with a small icebreaker on origin stories because of the breadth of experience we have. For the panel, what inspired you to pursue a security career in healthcare, or was it just by chance? And Jason, I'll start with you.
I would like to say that my career picked me. It didn't. I graduated my undergraduate program. I went to William and Mary, and like most of the graduating class, moved north to DC, where I found a job with one of the Beltway Bandits, a company by the name of Booz Allen and Hamilton, a consulting firm that put me on a project that happened to take advantage of some of my computer background. But remember, we didn't teach cyber in those days. That project, for those that are as old as me may remember, the VA was not always a cabinet level department. It suddenly rose to that level, and it was remiss with respect to its IT and cybersecurity operations. Again, we didn't call it cyber then. And I was part of a large team that helped build their first cyber program. So you know the world of consulting. Now I've done one project in healthcare cyber, and now I'm a healthcare cyber expert. A couple years later, this gentleman by the name of Robert Morris from Potomac, Maryland, let loose the famous internet worm that took down what we were increasingly relying upon, and I got shipped off to Carnegie Mellon to build the original computer emergency response team before it got subsumed under Homeland Security. And thus, that was the start of my career, and I've never looked back. I've continued to work in those two sectors, which is really fortunate now because I think in many respects we now spend more on healthcare in this country than we do on things people traditionally think of when they think of the cyber mission.
Absolutely. Anahi, how about you?
Yeah, so a little bit, I guess I chose cybersecurity, healthcare chose me. we'll go with that. I actually in college thought that I would come out designing robots as an engineering student, and ended up working as an engineer, but quickly rose to project management for a large technology global company, and was a very hands-on technology project manager. Got exposed to all different kinds of areas of IT, and each one of them had a cybersecurity component to it. And I just fell in love with the cybersecurity aspect of technology, and wasn't making a ton of money at the time. So I was bartending on the side, and complaining to the owner's son that I needed to make a move. And he said, at the time, he worked for Einstein Healthcare Network, and said, I think they're hiring their first information security officer. Give me your resume. And 20 years later, 20 and a half years later, here I am on my actually second information security officer role.
That's awesome. And on the note of robotics experience, I'm even more glad to have you on this panel, given the topic is AI. So very, very happy to have you. And then John, would love to hear from you. Like what got you working closely with the industry?
Yeah, I was one of those ones that thought that I was going to be a trauma surgeon or emergency medicine doctor.
Yeah,
Went pre-med in school and hit organic chemistry too, and it hit me back real hard. And that was the end of that journey. And so I pivoted at NC State and went to the entrepreneurship and business program. Had this healthcare love and helping people, and I was trying to figure it out and got connected with the healthcare technology SaaS startup organization, and just have been running in this space ever since. I love what people do in healthcare, helping others. I just get to come at it from a business and technology perspective rather than a clinical practitioner like I dreamed of as a kid. So great to be around.
that's awesome. It's great to hear all these origin stories, as there's often different paths that people go down, but you end up driving very similar common goals, given we're all very cybersecurity professionals. That said, though, I'd love to dive into the weeds a bit. We'll first start with this overarching and really dominant topic and industry mover, AI. When I talk about AI, I sometimes frame it as one of those never-ending trains where each train that passes you by is a train cart that passes you by is a bit unique and different from the rest. But that train, it keeps on going. You're stuck in your car, you're at the train track, it just keeps on going forever and ever. The point is that it's never ending, and it hasn't been for several years now. With that, I'd love to get a pulse from each of you on the impacts AI is having in the industry. How are you seeing AI impact the industry in a meaningful way, and with the emphasis on really the healthcare industry? Anahi, let's start with you.
Yeah, so we're seeing incredible positive impacts to the industry. Now, I want to recognize that AI has been around for a really long time. It is not something that just started a couple of years ago, although the big buzz right now is around Gen AI and why we're talking about it so much. And so we've been using robotic processing and AI to drive efficiencies in healthcare now for about a decade. And as a highly innovative organization, have dove full on in on the most emergent piece of AI, which is Gen AI. And we're seeing, we're utilizing it in ambient listening. Our physicians are no longer experiencing what we call pajama time, which is going home after a long day and continuing to chart. After seeing patients all day long, they're now able to utilize ambient listening technology to transcribe those patient interactions and translate them into something that can be added to the clinical record with a much faster review by the clinicians. We have other use cases where we're also leveraging it to drive down, create efficiencies and drive down costs. I think in healthcare, we can all recognize that patient safety is life critical. So we need to make sure that we have the right governance processes in place to ensure that we're positively impacting care, but we're also trying to lower ever increasing costs of operating healthcare. And so utilizing the technology to help us to be more lean and efficient are, two primary areas of focus for us.
That's awesome. And yeah, like just echoing the notion of ambient listening and using AI to make some of those processes a lot more efficient and boost productivity. It gives time back to those clinicians and physicians to spend on the patients, right? And pay more, even more attention that they already are. So completely want to echo that. Jason, I'm curious your perspective here too, just hearing that, and if you have anything else to add or describe there.
Yeah, as a hospital, we're pretty much doing the exact same things that Anahi is doing. But I want to kind of start with a premise that says AI and its use cases are so compelling that neither IT and certainly not cyber can say no to it. And we should distinguish what everybody's concerned about now is not the rules base or earlier versions of AI that have been around for 20 or 30 years. It's more generative AI or agentic AI and the next versions that are to come. We're using it for delivery of care, which, as you mentioned, is actually an opportunity for IT to really and cyber to prove its value to the organization. Our clinicians measure us very simply. Are we making their lives easier? Are we making it easier for them to serve our patients? They measure that in time, as Anahi said. If we can see a patient and chart the encounter in 15 minutes, and I can get that down to 14 minutes, that is money. That is better for everybody involved, right? The problem is, so wait a minute. So delivery of care, we're also using it for delivery of IT, which in a sense is in support of care. Everything's in support of the patient care mission. The other thing that we're seeing is the adoption by the bad guys. Every key metric that we in cyber look at to evaluate our posture and what we're up against is reflecting the fact that it's not just us on the good guys side adopting AI. The bad actors are adopting it as well. The orders of magnitude of attacks that we're seeing per second is the telling story that I need to draw the conclusion that if we're not doing it, they will be. So the problem is not what AI gets right. The challenge for us is that people forget that these AIs were trained on we fallible humans. These AIs were trained on that wonderful thing called the internet, which is at best full of questionable facts, right? So we have to impose a burden on ourselves when we're using the AI to make sure that the results we get are trustworthy. So go
Yeah.
back to what I said before when the doctor says, yes, the use of this AI helps me see more patients and do more things and make a better use of my time. That's great. But when we say to the senior clinician, hang on a second, it may take you a little bit longer because in the early stages, I need you to review what that ambient listening device is going to put into the chart to make sure there's no hallucinations or mistakes. That's a real frustration. They don't want to hear that. The doctor says, "No, I want to trust this." Well, but we have to evaluate to make sure we can trust it. Because if it gets a mistake, that's not a cyber risk. That's a clinician's license, potentially. That's bad patient outcomes if another downstream provider treats on what's in the chart that didn't get it right. Now, the good news is the devices that we're using are surprisingly good at this ambient listening and getting it right and ignoring the social chit chat that you have with your clinician.
Yeah, and it opens up a really good conversation for integrity that we'll get on later on in this discussion.
Exactly.
And just how the need to really have strict governance and more mature data governance for the data and systems that we're managing. John, I'm curious, like to hear from you on trends that are gaining the most momentum based on the clients that you work with across the board, because you have a really broad sense of the industry given your line of work.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, I think, and we're hearing it right here, this like balance between core IT use cases and industry, and then healthcare outcomes where our physicians and different organizations want to see a particular outcome. So those notes, those clinical notes are a great use case. Anything to improve revenue cycle, and that rev cycle is very important. So you're seeing a lot of claims processing, intelligent document processing, these use cases where we can be very outcome specific and know exactly what kind of outcome we're looking for, provide the proper amount of human intervention, and gain that efficiency right now in a more risk tolerant sort of way. And then I think one
Yeah.
that's fun for me to be able to see is that population health and medical research segment. And RTP, where I live and breathe, we have a lot of clinical research, a lot of medical research happening with the universities. And so we're able to see that these technologies are really able to help with that massive data pipeline issue that organizations have struggled with over the past several years as they continue to grow. So it's a really fun space right now for healthcare to be able to leverage these AI use cases.
Absolutely. And it continues to grow. Uh, Thanks for all these responses, team. And I agree that the underlying concept in that AI implemented correctly and used correctly with guardrails can boost general productivity and efficiencies. But that said, like as we've been talking about in each of these responses, like we see with any new magical system that comes out, there's this new uncertainty, governance, and overall risk to account for, especially when we think of system and data governance at large. So with that, I'm curious about any blockers, challenges, or gotchas that you're seeing or anticipate with securing AI implementation in healthcare. Jason, I'll start with you.
Thanks. So let's go back and clarify that AI, as far as a tech thing, is nothing new in terms of our policies, right? Most hospitals say, I have to manage the risk to our patients and to the data that they entrust to us, right? The patient didn't say, I chose that vendor, I chose that app, I chose that service. We're the ones that made that choice. So minimally, we have to have the ability to defend that decision. We also need to make sure that we avoid an undesirable outcome of all the kinds that cyber has been concerned about. So most of us have some sort of vendor third-party risk management process. Maybe we use a tool like Vanta to have a vendor complete an assessment. Certainly, we look for medical device disclosure statements and FDA 10Ks and SOC reports and all the like. The problem is, and it really is a little bit bothersome, the biggest blocker that I'm facing is the market, is the vendors themselves. We've always known that IT apps had this incredible pressure. It was all about time to market. For them to get to us with their product sooner was their goal. Well, you're selling a product into one of the most heavily regulated spaces. According to some reports, we are the most attacked vertical industry because of the data that we have and because of the challenges, the financial pressures under which we're operating, which often for many members of this industry are a limiting factor in terms of the controls they can put in place. So we're a target-rich environment, and yet these companies don't anticipate that the likes of John and Anahi and I are going to ask them questions about your AI. And by the way, it's not just, even if you're just developing sometimes they're delivering an AI, but sometimes they used AI to develop their non-AI thing, right? So I need to ask both questions, and they don't have good answers. So far, we've probably looked at 40 to 50 major AI use cases over the past 8 months to a year. And I think one vendor had already anticipated the ask and came with an accompanying document that anticipated my questions and had the good answers. And by the way, if there's any vendors listening, you don't have to have perfect answers. You need to have good enough answers. You need to let me know that it's on your roadmap, right? That you've thought about this so that we can get to that initial objective that we talked about. It's not perfect security. It's about we need to be able to defend our decision to use that tech. And frankly, that's the biggest one, is that the market's just moving so fast that they haven't, and I don't see them ever catching up, right? The rate of capabilities, the progress that each AI is building on its predecessor is a it's not a linear function. This is a geometric curve, and to the winners, those that get left behind may never catch up. So you need, guys, hey, there's this thing called AI you could use to develop your documentation, right? Yeah, it seems to me a rather obvious answer.
No, I completely hear you there. It's that emphasis on vendor due diligence, and it's always been an important thing: cybersecurity, data privacy, integrity, and I think AI really just it has its own list of things that you need to check, make sure are being done and accounted for, and there's that third party risk emphasis there.
And the other point is it's not just when I'm using the AI as a solution and I'm dropping it in without much modification. There are AI tools, particularly tools that do no code or low code automation. For folks who remember the days of a macro, right? Most of my teams know that they've heard me beat into their heads. If they're doing something 3, 4, 5 times a week, that's a candidate for automation. Well, back in the
Yep.
day, we were doing automation where we could kind of program the steps, but the thing that had to happen with this machine, our brain, was hard to automate. Now we can drop in an AI. There's 50 different specific purpose AIs that can. So when I get that SOC report from the vendor, why am I reading it? Why am I reviewing it? I can pick a particular AI that will summarize that for me and basically give me a thumbs up or thumbs down so that the human in the loop is making better use of my time when I make that evaluation of the AI.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And shameless plug here, if you are looking in the market for an AI-based solution to help with your third-party review processes or questionnaire automation, check out Vanta. We're happy to help. Anahi, I'm actually very curious, just based on what Jason's saying, are you seeing similar patterns in your role as CISO as well? Or are there different ones as well?
So I am absolutely seeing similar patterns to what Jason is referencing. In fact, I made a comment to somebody last week that AI vendors now remind me much of what medical device vendors and manufacturers were like 10 years ago, where you would ask them, uh, what's in your sauce? What's in the device? And they could barely tell you. If we wanted to segment something, and we went to the vendors to say what ports and protocols is it communicating on so that we can segment, they would tell us, and then we would break things because the manufacturers themselves really didn't know what was in the sauce. And we're seeing the same thing with now AI vendors. It's, how are you training your models? How are you lowering the probabilities of hallucination, how have you measured potential bias, and they really have no answers. But in addition to that, pulling on that vendor threat, I will also say that one of the challenges that we're seeing is that they're selling AI into everything, and our clinicians don't understand the difference, and they're not educated in AI because it is so new to them. And so the challenges of them wanting everything because it sounds amazing, balancing those with educating the end users on what's really underneath the hood, and managing the risks along with our business and clinical partners is becoming ever so more challenging in this ecosystem of what we call supply chain risk management, right? Vendor risk management, so on and so forth. But a couple of other things. Vendors are now introducing the functionality without necessarily recontracting or re-engaging with us so that we can understand what changes have been made to the technology. Now, Microsoft every other day is introducing new AI functionality where I don't even know what the thing is doing and I have to relearn it. So it's becoming common day. But I think one of the biggest challenges is their desire to use our incredibly valuable data to train their models. And we have never, by way of policy, allowed our vendors to utilize de-identified information or aggregated information of our patients for product development. And AI is no different. Training an AI to enhance and improve the algorithms utilizing our data is not something that we generally authorize. And this isn't a cybersecurity policy. This is an organizational-wide policy from the CFO who recognizes that monetizing of that data has real value, to the data privacy team who understands that we have regulatory requirements to protect that data, to the cybersecurity team members that are, spending a lot of time attempting to protect that data. So I would say that corralling and having to navigate and balance what the vendors want to do with our information while still protecting that information, it has become an exponentially hard challenge.
Absolutely. John, from your perspective, across various healthcare organizations in the industry, how do you see these challenges show up broadly across them?
Yeah, I think Anahi and Jason bring up like awesome points, and this is fun for me. So we saw in our business, we're an AWS partner. We saw these organizations adopt cloud and try to understand like the democratization of cloud. A business user all of a sudden swipes a credit card, and now security has to figure out how to protect these assets and do all these things. And there's this weird shift that happened in organizations where IT traditionally controlled the IT infrastructure, and it was a lot easier to wrap that bow around it. And then we got to a place where now we have all these new things that we need to govern and control and be mindful of because it's impacting real patients. Then we take this step now where we put Gen AI models out there, and it's like the credit card on steroids again, where any user can go and now type to it. They don't even have to know how to go in a console and provision resources. They just type
Yeah.
to it and ask it a question, and all this stuff starts to occur. And so we're really getting back to those like fundamentals of how do we, organize ourselves? How do we work with our business stakeholders, with our clinicians, our different teams to really work as a group, a unit there? And core IT is a great place to have these like test cases and be able to learn what is possible because like Jason said, this is not something that's like hey, I can afford the last several years, let someone else figure it out and show up to the party later. Like it's adopting and happening, and on he's seeing it now. They're releasing it in the tools without even consent or conversation all the time, and it's just that natural cycle of innovations occurring really, really quick. So, because of the co-creation, because of the risks that are associated with this use case of being able to be empowered on your own, we're seeing a lot of conversations with organizations around zero trust models, around security controls, governance, being able to integrate platforms together so that we can start to get that visibility and take that mindset of like, let's understand what we have here as an organization. Let's understand our mentality, and then let's start tackling this just as we would with the cloud mode, knowing that it is a little bit different of a beast fundamentally.
And then, John, like on that same note, what are some of those practices on approaching governance for AI that you would maybe share with the audience here?
Yeah, I mean, I think like some of this comes down to a few things. So one is again just understanding what our landscape are. Who are the people in our organization? They're going to have the authority and capacity to be able to test and build. What are the stakeholders in our organization? Are we going to have a tiger team or different individuals that are going to own this, or are we going to try to share this across the organization? That communication really seems to be a very important broad starting point for organizations. And then also like, what is our foundation or framework going to be? How do we want to set these guardrails moving forward? And so that communication is really going back to core IT, core GRC teams, and starting to have those conversations. I think that's always step one. And a lot
Yeah,
of times that's getting skipped, right? Everyone's so excited to get that thing that's going to shave the minute or two off of their visit and make it easier for the clinicians. And sometimes we're skipping those foundational steps of having the conversation of real impact to the organization, real impact to the patients, and what are the ramifications or consequences, positive or negative, associated with the decisions we're making.
absolutely. Yeah. Procuring a tool is one thing, but then the considerations on how you implement it and what it has access to, different story, right? And that's where some of the risks start to come into play.
Yeah, and
Anahi,
even
yeah.
ethical. Sorry, I was just going to say, like even ethical decisions too, right? Like we have a lot of Anna, he started talking about it. We have a lot of really important data here, and how are we deciding how to treat that data appropriately? It does come down to an organizational ethics question too.
No, absolutely. And that's actually a really good segue into hearing from the two CISOs we have with us is just how they're thinking about governance and it within the organizations today. So, Anahi, I'm curious from a Christiana Care perspective, how are you thinking about governance in your organization today?
So we have an AI steering committee that was stood up about over a year ago when we recognized that there was this flood of desire to adopt these solutions and a recognition that we needed um, to manage it effectively, risk manage it effectively, and so. That steering committee is responsible for developing and um, providing the oversight and governance for the organization, and it is comprised of critical stakeholders: chief medical officer, privacy officer, compliance officer, legal, research, cybersecurity, IT, quality and safety, among others. And their charge is really to understand how um, our business and clinical leaders want to leverage that technology. What mechanisms do we have in place to create education for those individuals around ensuring that ethics are accounted for, that challenges around bias and hallucination and are accounted for, that we're implementing guardrails around what we call the co-pilot model, right? We don't just use the technology, we require that there are humans that are validating the outputs of that technology to ensure efficacy, patient safety, appropriateness of use, so on and so forth. We've aligned on the NIST framework because we recognize that whether you pick NIST or you pick ISO or IEEE or EU or whatever, a framework is necessary in order to be able to measure against success. And so we started with the framework. We built the governance and the parameters. We developed a policy. And as we're seeing new use cases that we believe are applicable, we feed them through the steer. The steer doesn't look at everything. They're not there to say yes or no and evaluate every solution, but really ensuring that as we're building out our capabilities and use cases, that they understand and can lend a voice to the appropriate use and adoption of those use cases.
Absolutely. Yeah. Frameworks like NIST A, RMF, ISO 42001. I come into conversations with lots of customers about those frameworks, and it's because of just the industry push, right? And the importance of how AI systems can so easily be used in various systems, as something Jason was alluding to earlier. Jason, with that, I know you've talked a bit about this from a third-party risk perspective, but would love to hear more about, how, like, your approach to navigating AI risk in an organization.
Well, let me go back and pick up where Anahi was referring to governance. Initially, I didn't think that this was going to have any change, or it wasn't going to impel any need for change. We have three governance functions. We have governance at the board level. They're not focused on this. We have governance at the data level, which is, are we allowed to use this data for this purpose? And then we have IT governance, which is more about, are we spending on the right things? Are we getting the results and returns for that investment? And if not, do we have an opportunity to do a course correction?
Right.
And so, so we've got everything covered there, right? We might want to remind everybody, because what this really was a question for us was a question of culture. We have an acquisition policy, we have a procurement policy, we have a policy that says if you're going to buy anything, before you buy it, right, not shadow IT as John was talking about, you got to work with IT. So initially we just put out a reminder that says, we all know we want to use AI, there's great use cases, but before you do any of that, you got to work with us. So the problem was, over time, many of our clinicians kind of took it upon themselves, because we've got a group of physicians that think about the problems they're dealing with, and they try to solve them themselves. There had become this disconnect between the senior clinician staff and IT. No, you can't do this. We have to do this in partnership. Stop coming to us with a contract. You said you measured us based on how well we were making your lives easier, whether we were giving a return of time. You just wasted your own time. Because if you went to the contract stage and now it goes into our contract management system, which triggers a review by legal for legal risks, and our CTO has to look at it. Will this fit with our existing architectural stack? I look at it from a security standpoint. Can we configure it? Does it have, basic controls that are in the framework, et cetera? Is this on-prem? Is this in the cloud? And if it's in the cloud, how does it manage access control? All of those kinds of things. It would be a real shame if we got a no out of that process. Now, I want to make a point. My job is not really to say yes or no as the CISO. My job, like other CISOs, is really to inform the conversation. We have men and women whose job it is to say yes and no to things every single day. And my job is to make sure that they are doing that mindful of the risks. And as Anahi mentioned before, there's a huge education process, because this is very different. Very few of our clinicians, they see the value, but they don't appreciate the risk. right? And especially at the dawn of any major tech era change like we're seeing now, a lot of the tools are free. Free doesn't
Yeah.
mean you don't run through our governance process, right? Free still has, there's still terms, there's still a EULA. And by the way, there's no such thing as free. If you're not paying for it with cash, you're the product. You're paying for it with data. And by the way, we're not
Data.
allowed to do that, right? So that's that to me, it's really a question of that culture. And as long as we can have some good success stories and have that good partnership, saying to the business, we will shoulder the burden. Give us as much lead time as you can because this is going to take a fair amount of time because the vendors, to my prior point, they're not ready to give us the answers we need to quickly get to yes. So in most cases, and I think the vendors are receptive, what we're going to do is we're going to do a POV. A no cost proof of value. But then the challenge comes, and this is what we're working on now, and we're dipping our toe into the agile methodology, not for software development, but for reconciling competing priorities. And the reason is it shouldn't be me as the CISO or even the CIO or the CTO making the decision about which use cases we try to enable with AI. That has to be the champions and the business owners who are saying, because we don't have unlimited resources. There's only so many of these things we can support simultaneously. Which are our best use cases? And that really requires that active conversation where it's our job to inform the conversation. And that's our approach to governance here.
I gotcha. No, and the very valid points, especially just kind of going back to what you said earlier about how, AI, it's not as a system and systems getting procured by organizations. It's not new concept, right? It's still a system. It still needs to go through the same vendor management processes and procedures. It's just the stakes of what an AI system can do versus others. They're different and different and higher in a lot of cases.
I do want to pick one little detail as an example, because I don't know that everybody else has gotten that far into the conversation yet. Most hospitals have at least three different kinds of tech, right? We've got all the building management systems, which hopefully are on a separate segment. And we got traditional IT, and then what the rest of the world calls OT, our bioengineering stuff, all our medical measuring devices, right? Well, a lot of these AIs can gather data to do what it needs to do to analyze based on pulling data off of one of these devices. Well, depending on your healthcare system and depending on the decisions that were made, the legacy decisions that were made, right? Where I know most of us have legacy tech where the function that thing still does a great job doing that job that it did 15 years ago, but it's sitting on top of embedded XP or older operating systems. And now using it to interconnect with this new AI, the risk that we were accepting before because it was tightly controlled and kind of a standalone, or maybe a person pulled the data off with a USB stick or pulled it off manually. Now we're going to automate those flows of data. The potential for a really bad outcome increases, geometrically. So that's why we have to have this conversation, because it has to be able to work. And most of our clinicians know what they want to do with it. They don't know how we've enabled them to do what they want. And unfortunately, decisions that we made before, which were the right decisions in that day and age, are not always the right decision now. And that requires much additional spend that they're not thinking about. It's not just acquisition cost. It's retrofit, it's configuration and maintenance. So there's a lot more to the cost considerations that we need to make sure those making the decisions are aware of.
Absolutely. Very, very helpful to hear from you and each one of you in terms of just how approaching governance is for in your organizations, because it's really foundational for organizational cyber resilience. I do want to knit further on a topic that we alluded to earlier in this conversation, and that's that of integrity and its relationship to data governance. To kick that part off, how should we think about security and integrity in the AI space? And the reason I bring it up is because prior to AI, I feel like integrity type discussions were more prominent in transactional and reporting related activities, especially financial services and tech industry. Don't get me wrong, still relevant, I think, industry wide, but I think we're seeing more and more of it come up. And I'm just curious how AI changes that perspective or brings more attention to it. So Jason, I would love to hand it back to you actually to get your take and how it factors into your thinking and your broader teams.
Yeah, I'll be short in my response. I think I've addressed this pretty much in my other answers. The bottom line is, let me share this through the lens of my security team, who were rightful in expressing concern about the fact that AI is going to do away with a bunch of jobs. It's going to create many new jobs, but it's going to cause a bunch of folks currently doing something that can be replaced by an AI to lose their job. And so, well, what we want to do is we're going to focus on the human in the loop, right? In fact, there are regulations that have already come to market that pose a very heavy burden on us if we use the AI to make a decision. So the answer is very simple. We're not going to have the AI make a decision. We may have the AI suggest a decision for an IT or in a clinical use case for the clinician to say, all right, the last million times this set of medical characteristics presented themselves, this was the appropriate course of treatment. You can suggest that, but the AI is not going to make the decision. It's not just about the biased hiring decision. Obviously, there's many different use cases, and it's the same thing where we're evaluating, I don't know, security data that would come from a SOC, and whether we're working our way down the funnel. It's still going to be that human in the loop, and that's where we will be able to have greater assurances that the integrity is there.
Absolutely. And just point of emphasis on what you've been saying, Jason. If we think about CIA triad, confidentiality, integrity, availability, pre-AI or parallel AI, because AI has technically been around for a very long time. I think the focus has been a lot, or love has been given a lot to confidentiality and availability. Integrity gets it, don't get me wrong, but I think we're starting to see more love being given to how we think about integrity within organizations. If we think about the risks of AI, right? Go for it.
Yeah, I also want to elaborate because we're already thinking about AI in a narrow way. AI is going to redo everything.
Oh yeah.
For our high risk help desk requests, right? Someone says, I lost my phone. I need you to redirect my 2FA to a new number. New number? You lost your phone, you get a new phone. You don't get a new phone number. That's weird. So we're going to require, if you are in that situation, if that's truly the case, you got to get on camera. But you got to get on camera and mush your badge into your face because they're deep fakes that are very difficult. And again, that's a question of integrity. How can I trust that thing? So, we've got really have to, this is upping the game. The things that we had to deal with yesterday are dwarfing in comparison to the new threats that we're having to deal with tomorrow.
Absolutely. John, curious to hear from you on this integrity and security topic.
Sure.
How are we seeing this show up in practice across the broader organizations?
Yeah, I think one of the things Jason made in passing comment on was culture. Like we're seeing that play out here because if your organization has the culture of solving these challenges, dealing with tech debt, making the hard decisions along the way, this security and integrity conversation is easier. Security, I feel like generally, organizations are addressing that, have continued to address that, and we're going to fight that battle until the end of time. Like encryption and new resources to be able to solve for deepfakes, organizations will solve for them. The AI adoption conversation around integrity is a very interesting one right now because of the widely known, like we ask it to draw a pretty picture for us, it can't draw that picture. We ask for an answer and it gives us those hallucinations, and ultimately it's the integrity of the AI model that is creating some of this concern or challenge to adopt. And so, again, I look at everything with an Amazon view, Amazon lens. And so in AWS, there's this symbolic AI, this mathematical model to be able to do these automated reasoning checks and start to prove mathematically that the outputs that we're getting from these AI models are actually correct. And I think that that's going to be really exciting. That's going to be a really exciting outcome for us to see mature as organizations go on. And then also just trying to figure out better about how are you as an organization going to justify the integrity in your AI models, or the technologies that you choose to implement in your organization. Are they the right ones for you? Is it meeting that benchmark or cultural foundational answer that you've defined as an organization, saying, hey, this is the standard that we're going to hold, and we're going to continue to make sure that our technology is implementing that. And if there's a blocker or there's some reason why it's not there, we want to be able to address that. So I think, again, we're seeing a lot of cultural decisions by organizations, and it's very true in the integrity and security domain space right now too.
Absolutely. Thank you, John. We do have a question that came up through Q&A that I want to pose to the panelists here. What use cases in healthcare do you think that digital tech service companies should try to solve for pitching to healthcare prospects, solutions specific to AI, if you were to pick one? And Anahi, I'd love to turn that to you if you'd take that.
So I can give you some examples of what we're doing. Specifically, we're looking at rev cycle efficiencies around denials, insurance denials. There's a recognition in our organization that the insurance companies are using the technology to deny claims. And so we want to get ahead of that and use the technology to combat that by making sure that we have really tight business cases and justification for the claims that we're providing, so that we're not wasting tons of time on those appeals. That we have teams that are assigned to just appeal denial letters, and so that's one use case. Another one is really around access to healthcare. Our ORs are filled to the max. Scheduling time in those ORs takes weeks, if not months. And so OR utilization to ensure that we are being as efficient as we can possibly be is another area.
Awesome.
Third one is around physician burnout. And ensuring that we are giving time back. And I think we talked a little bit about this, giving time back to the physicians so that they can use that time to be healthier, and honestly, make more money for the organization.
Absolutely. Thank you, Anahi. We've all talked a lot about governance and really involvement of people, processes, and the organization at large. I'm curious to hear from you, Jason and Anahi, on how you manage executive buy-in in terms of making security and compliance a core part of how your organization operates. And there's the reason I ask is because I think there's sometimes a tendency for some organizations to treat it as a check the box exercise. But we know, as we've been talking about, it's way more than that. And the proliferation of AI just demands it implicitly to have way more attention. So Jason, would love to start with you, and then Anahi, get your perspective as well.
Well, this, of course, is the $64,000 question. I've had the very good fortune of working with and for some of the best organizations and some of the best leaders, and I don't go this alone. That's the lesson. We have an informal group of risk leaders, because if you think about the C-suite is essentially a distribution of the risk pie, right? So if legal counsel or general counsel calls that an issue, that's one person calling out one issue. But if I get together with legal counsel and our chief privacy officer and maybe a CTO or a CIO, and 5 or 6 of us are expressing this, there's something there that leadership says that we need to pay attention to this. In the hospital setting, the other most important thing that I've learned to do, and I suspect Anahi and others will echo this, we have a chief medical, not just a CMO, we have a CMIO, a chief medical information officer. We also are establishing a CNIO, chief nursing information officer. I don't have, as John said, I didn't even attempt to go pre-med. I don't have any of those credentials behind my name. I can be absolutely right in what I'm saying. I can even say it the right way. I don't mean to suggest that clinicians are arrogant, but they are going to receive the message best when communicated from someone who's from their own community, right? And in our case, our CMIO runs our emergency department, and there is no better crucible for having to really address AI risks than the ED, because of the speed with which, whether it's helping us with a diagnosis we might otherwise have missed, whether it's helping with documentation or any of that's really where the message comes, and that's how we have the conversation, because the concrete examples and the analogies, and you're keeping it from, they don't want to hear the tech. They want to know, how does this affect us? How does this affect my ability to take care of patients? And when you can put it in those terms, that's where you get that at least the willingness to suspend distrust long enough for us to prove that we knew what we were talking about. We jointly achieved the good outcomes. And by the way, one last question for the person in the chat. Anahi mentioned the issues with using data. one of the great uses of AI is in the creation of synthetic data sets that you can use for testing purposes, right? So to whoever asked that question before, don't forget that rather obvious use case.
Thank you, Jason. Anahi, would love to turn it to you on leadership buy-in.
I, like Jason, I am very fortunate that I worked for two organizations that have have prioritized cybersecurity. And interestingly enough, when this whole notion of Gen AI first started, leaders were coming directly to me because they didn't really understand it, but they understand governance around cybersecurity, and so they wanted to leverage the technology and were looking to me to help them. And I had to educate them on the fact that this is less of a cybersecurity concern as it was an operational and clinical concern. And that essentially was the genesis of our steer, is the organization saw a need. They only knew to reach out to me. And so I was able to facilitate the creation of the governance processes and engage the right stakeholders in the organization to begin those governance processes. And so as an organization that really wants to be the first to adopt technology, we have a culture where building those governance processes are inherent to the fabric of our organization.
Thank you. No, absolutely. That's incredible. And thank you both for your perspectives there. We're reaching the end of our webinar session. And to close it out, I'd love to get from each of you maybe a piece of advice for those that are in the space. If you could give one piece of advice to those that are listening on how to navigate AI risk and compliance, what would it be? And John, we'll start with you.
Yeah, sure. I think AI is not going to be the last time we see healthcare innovation. It's going to continue to occur over and over again. And ultimately, this comes down to successful customers having that right culture, like Anahi and Jason continue to mention. And it used to be people, process, technology. We talked about it over and over again. And now there's like this people, process, philosophy, and technology discussion where there's nuance in adopting this innovation. And so to be successful, we don't want to wait for the perfect roadmap. We want to make sure that we're, building and engaging cross-functional teams, engaging that chief medical or nursing information officer, and really just making this security and compliance discussion in as an enabler throughout the organization, as opposed to this being, that checkbox that we need to go see at the end. So, love the comments from today.
Thank you, John. Anahi, pass it to you.
My advice would be, don't run away from the technology. Don't necessarily sprint towards it, but certainly walk towards it. If you choose to run away from the technology, or as cybersecurity professionals sometimes do, block the technology, they'll find, our stakeholders, our end users will find a way to use it. And then we lose visibility. And so ensuring that we're embracing it and educating end users along the way, it's going to help us manage risks a lot more than pretending that it doesn't exist.
Absolutely. And then Jason, to tie us off on the panelist standpoint.
Sure. For those who aren't aware, the Health Sector Coordinating Council has an artificial intelligence cyber risks specific to healthcare white paper. I would encourage people to grab a copy of that and become familiar with it. Again, so much of what we need to do in this space is about defensibility, not perfect, and what's reasonable and appropriate. And when a group like that for our sector is saying these are the things you need to be doing, you better be doing them or have a good reason for why you're not doing them. The other suggestion is, we don't need new tools to secure AI. We need our existing tool vendors to address the inclusion of AI into our tech mix. So whenever I hear that the market isn't responding, or they say to me, well, you're the first CISO of a healthcare system to ask us that question. Really? Am I? I find that hard to believe. Maybe you're a new entrant and maybe you haven't spent any time in healthcare, but otherwise, if we are not more demanding of our vendors and of our partners, why would we expect to get more. We have to ask. They need to hear that we want this so that they can put it on their roadmap and build it into their next release. Volunteer where you can to be part of a proof of value or some sort of joint venture where you're helping them understand what the needs are. Right. To me, I think it's just another example of what Anhi said, that you don't ignore this. This is here to stay. Double down, get in it, participate, roll up your sleeves, and be more demanding. You know.
Absolutely. And I'll also add a piece of advice just from what I've heard across the industry and taking into account the panelists' viewpoints. I think really focus on your data and systems and getting very crisp of the inventory that you have. I think like good asset inventories, understanding where data resides, what's going in and out of them. It's actually a really challenging activity to do. It sounds very simple in concept, but like truly taking the time to go do that and having a central repo of that, to put that effort in so that adopting AI and really having those conversations to strategically embed it into your processes just becomes a little bit easier in the future.
If I can contribute to the point that you just made, Fazil, many of these AIs have a component that's in the cloud. Let's not forget that our most demanding regulation is the Joint Commission, not HIPAA. I'm not showing disrespect for HIPAA, but the fact that we have to be able to continue providing care to our patients in the absence of power, in the absence of tech, the cloud is resilient, right? Amazon's got high availability clusters, load balanced across multiple geographies. It's there. What if the internet isn't there? Let's not forget that when we moved, again, going back to ARPANET, when we invented the internet, we still have single points of failure in DNS. I've experienced fiber cuts. Hospitals rely on local municipalities for priority access to power and internet. County governments. I'm not insulting anybody, but those are the least well equipped of all forms of government. And sometimes we have unwanted outcomes because somebody wasn't paying proper attention. We need to think about that in terms of our uptime missions and make sure that we've got the appropriate downtime procedures, because as we increasingly rely on these things for more and more delivery of care, right? Now we have to have new downtime procedures for what we're going to do when those things aren't available. Cloud's up, but I can't get to it. Right?
Absolutely. Cool. Well, everyone, thank you so much for taking the time to attend this webinar, and a special thank you to our panel members here for a very fun and engaging conversation. Truly appreciate all the insights and the time you took to really discuss them live with everyone. If the audience at large has any questions about Vanta or how to get started with us, please feel free to reach out. You'll get a follow-up email from us shortly. Thank you again, and hope you all have a wonderful rest of the week.
Thank you to Vanta and to everyone that joined us today. Please visit our website at community.hlth.com to catch up on all Health Go Live webinars and to watch the recording of today's session. Don't forget to join us in Amsterdam June 16th through 19th for Health Europe.